Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this year's HealMind conference titled Let's Heal Together. My name is Anjie Hamel, and I have the pleasure of being your master of ceremony for this conference. Before we start, I would like to state that this conference is being held on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. It is important to recognize the land that we learn and grow on, and I strongly encourage you, from wherever you're watching this conference, to search up which land your domicile is occupying. There are plenty of websites and organizations that can help, such as native-land.ca and many more. Taking such initiative is a step in the right direction to recognize Canada's colonial history and its effects on Indigenous peoples nowadays. Awareness resources are available on governmental websites and at indigenousworks.ca. And yeah, thank you. Folks, these past 2 years have taught us a great number of lessons, from taking care of our physical health to checking in with the ones we love most, and most importantly, checking in on ourselves and our mental health. There might have been times where we were too afraid to speak up for ourselves with our best interest in mind. Today's conference has a purpose to help with destigmatization, to dismantle stereotypes when it comes to mental health, and to learn to live with our own mental illness and be aware of our peers as well. Without further ado, allow me to introduce you to a very special person, Drayton Mullen-Dabigui. Drayton is a student at the University of Ottawa in Health Sciences. He is the founder and CEO of 20 Today, 20 Tomorrow, the organization who organized this event. Drayton, thank you so much for this event. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. My name is Drayton, like Angie mentioned. Thank you for the welcome. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. I just quickly checked the chat, and we have people from all over the place. I want to welcome you and thank you. I want to thank our guest speakers and everybody who helped me organizing this. And I'm just really, really thankful for everything that has been able to come to life this day. And I'd like to say that today we're going to talk about an important subject, mental health. And for me personally, my journey started in March. Before that, I knew what it was, but you never really understand it until you face it or until you feel it. And with the pandemic and high school graduation being canceled, and then my first university year being fully online, and this drastic change in my life definitely took a toll on me, and it kind of made me realize that there's more to like health than just like physically staying fit. Because I tried my best to stay fit, like physically I enjoyed sports, but with the pandemic there was definitely something more missing, and I'm thankful for that because I was able to learn a little bit about it, and I started taking care of myself more. And one thing I did during this period of time that kind of helped me deal with these things is these things I called like daily vibes. It's what I would do. I would kind of just like say like find some inspirational quote or anything really, and just kind of like post it out there on social media, on Snapchat, Instagram. And it was more like in the hopes of like keeping myself accountable so I can kind of like live up to this to what I want to be, like the healthier person I want to be. And like eventually a lot of people got back to me and they were like, like this really helped. And it made me realize that I wasn't alone. There was so many people out there like me who were struggling. And I felt kind of a little bit better to know that I wasn't the only one facing these circumstances. And then this is where I kind of went a little crazy and started thinking about ways to make this more tangible thing, and something that can like touch more people and that people could understand. Because when we talk about mental health, it's always something that you can't really see and you don't really understand. And it's always easier when you have something tangible that to believe than to believe in something that you can't see. So I started thinking, and with the help of my team, we were able to put together this initiative that we've been working on for about almost a year. And basically, the idea behind this initiative was to spread positivity and spread mental health resource awareness. And now we wanted to do it in something that you can physically touch and see and understand. So we created a character. And this character, we named them HealMind to represent mental health wellness. And it's the guy that you saw on the little thing you saw on the beginning video and on the registrations. I'm sure you've seen him. You've seen them a little bit everywhere. Yes, on Angie's hoodie as well, which is an awesome hoodie, by the way. So then from there, we wanted to spread him a little bit everywhere, and we decided to make these little stickers. Now I have like a little mock-up. I don't know if everyone can see. It's very big. This is not the actual size of the sticker. It will be much smaller. But this is just for show. So you have this little character inside, and he says like, it's okay to not be okay. And yeah, so then we made these stickers, but they're not just like any kind of stickers. We used NFC technology. So to explain a little bit about this, it's what you use when you pay with your phone. It's the same kind of concept. So there's information that's exchanged from when you pay from your phone to like whatever you're using to pay, and we use the same concept. We put like these little NFC inlays in our stickers that give information to your phone. So basically what happens is we'll have these little stickers in different places here and there. And once you see this little sticker, you can actually tap it with your phone. And once you tap it with your phone, you get like this little web page pop up that we designed. And you have like these little kind of motivational quote that kind of like helps, maybe cheer up your day a little bit. And then we also give you access to like mental health resources around you. So it was a way to create something physical. It's something that can be placed in many different places, and it's more visible and it's more tangible, kind of like what we wanted. And associated to this, we have like a second phase where it's like the informational bit of the whole initiative, where we're going to be spreading information about like the character HealMind. And since it's something that people can see, especially with like younger people, they're going to start associating mental health with this character. And then through that, we're going to be able to host different conferences like these, where we can provide even more help than just our little motivational quotes. But from there, we can do all kinds of things like workshops, and like the possibilities are endless from there. As long as people understand and see, like, HealMind, it's mental health related, and the more it spreads, the more people are going to feel like it's something normal. And then eventually, hopefully, we get to the point where, it won't be needed anymore, because people will understand and will view it as just part of health itself, So yeah, that's the goal behind it. And from there, we've been working a lot this past summer on getting it out there. And thankfully, we've had a lot of help. There's this organization, IGF. Big shout out to them, because they were the ones that kind of like took the idea and helped us develop it and help finance it. They're a French organization in Saskatchewan, and they've helped us put it together. So as we speak, actually, the stickers are in Saskatchewan. They're being placed in different places. So that's a big deal for us. And then just recently, we've received a grant from Rising Youth, who are funded by the government of Canada, to expand, so we can get the stickers out to more places. And around October 10th will be where like the stickers will have launched in at the University of Ottawa. So yeah, that's another great thing that's happened. And after that, we hope to expand in high schools. by the end of 2021. And yeah, that's for that. I won't be talking too much about it. If you do have questions, though, please uh, get to me through emails or socials. All the information can be found at 20today, 20tomorrow.org. You can get in touch with me and ask me anything. And yeah, without further ado, I want to say that I'm happy with how things are turned out, and I really, really hope you enjoy this conference and all the great content we have for you today. I do have to add if to stick around till the end because we do have a special little announcement for people who attended. We are giving away one hoodie, kind of like the one Angie was wearing for the conference. So stick around for that. And yeah, if you do post content on your social media about this conference, please tag us at 20today at 20t20_org. I'll put all the information in the chat. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Drayton. By the way, the hoodie is very, very comfortable. I strongly recommend. Um, so this initiative will definitely help us on the long run, not only on interpersonal levels, but on larger scales with the need for destigmatization on mental health. And it's so nice to see such a small project bloom and flourish into something so much bigger. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Drayton. With that, I will introduce you to our first guest, Ali Salama. Ali is a social entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, ex-pro athlete, and the Middle East mental health ambassador. He founded EmpowerMag.com, the first mental health magazine in the Middle East, winning Harvard's top 7 most impactful social initiatives in 2019 and earning recognition from the World Health Organization. He hosts Apple's #1 charting youth leadership podcast called Empathy Always Wins, the world's exclusive leadership and mental health podcast focusing on empathy. Currently living in between Toronto and Dubai, Ali is working his startup, the Arabic and English Digital Peer Support Network, tackling marginalized youth mental health crisis and power. Welcome, Ali. We're happy to have you here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Our next guest is Myriam Georges-Estigene. Myriam Georges-Estigene is a bilingual clinical counselor working at Jaco Convit. Offers free short-term counseling to Black youth aged 12 to 25 residing in the city of Ottawa. Myriam has completed a master's degree in counseling psychology at the University of Ottawa and also holds a bachelor's degree at the University of Ottawa, in psychology with a minor in social sciences of health. This young Haitian Canadian woman's lived experience with inequality has has empowered her to help those in her community through counseling and the exploration of the self. Myriam's goal is to create safe spaces for Black youth to be vulnerable, thus giving them the opportunity to explore unhealthy behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs, with the objective of helping them open up to new ways of being that correspond to their authentic selves. Myriam wishes to empower her community through self-exploration and self-healing in a manner that respects their social-cultural identities and contributes to their well-being. Thank you for being here, Myriam.
Thank you for having me.
Our next guest is Nina Charley. Nina Charley is a UOttawa student who is very passionate about advocating for human rights. She is the spokesperson for Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition and has spoken in several other podcasts and events. Her name is Nina Charley, and she is also a lead director of the Rise Bridge Project. Through Rise Bridge, she will be holding space for BIPOC youth to discuss their experiences with racial trauma and how it has affected them and their mental health. They will also be hosting multiple programs to empower the community and break down the stigma. She's passionate about mental health, and we are happy to have her among us today. Welcome, Nina. Thank you for being with us. Our next guest is Dr. Jessica Ward-King. Dr. Ward-King earned her doctorate in experimental psychology from Goldsmith College, University of London in England, and a Bachelor of Sciences in psychology from McGill University. She has enjoyed a distinguished career with the Federal Public Service since 2010, working with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion portfolio. She also has bipolar II disorder. After years spent in denial about her illness, clinging to stigma, Jessica knew she could not be both mentally ill and successful, so she simply had to hide this defective part of herself away, lest anyone should see it and find out her real secret. Fast forward to today, and Jessica is your friendly neighborhood stigma crusher, out loud and proud about her mental health and illness, successful in every way that matters, and all her knowledge and lived experience have inspired her YouTube channel dedicated to crushing the stigma of mental illness. You can find it on YouTube, just search up Stigma Crusher. And thank you for being with us, Dr. Ward King.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. Awesome. Our next panelist is Joanna Townsend, has a master in social work and is a licensed social worker. She is a culturally affirming mixed race Latinx licensed psychotherapist based in the mountain town of Bozeman, Montana, which sits in the US Northern Rockies, north of Wyoming, and south of Alberta and Saskatchewan. She is the owner of Root and Rise Psychotherapy, a modern and inclusive mental wellness practice where she brings her true self and inner nerd therapy to the therapy space, combining mental health education with tools and support to ensure her clients feel seen, heard, and equipped to navigate life's peaks and throws. She specializes in the areas of anxiety, depression, self-worth, life transitions, eating disorder recovery, and is a big advocate for feeling all the feels: authenticity, self-compassion, letting go of shame, and integrating social justice approaches into how we view mental health experiences. When she's not with clients, she's either hiking, camping, skiing, baking sourdough, talking to her plants, or reading a fiction novel. You can find her on the gram at Joanna Talks Feelings. Welcome, Joanna. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. So excited.
Thank you. Our last panelist is Farahat. Wala'a is a registered psychotherapist, researcher, and co-founder of Rubik's Counseling Services. Rubik's Counseling Services is an organization shifting how mental health services are provided to diverse populations through accessible and culturally responsive education and therapy. She has extensive experience working with refugees, newcomers, and BIPOC communities, and has worked in various community settings as a brief walking counselor, long-term therapist, trainer, and researcher. Her research interests include refugee mental health, trauma, migration, identity, racism, and spirituality. Wala provides services in English and Arabic to adults, youth, children, and families. She enjoys creative mediums in session and believes that art and play therapy facilitate connection and healing across cultures and ages. Thank you, Wala, for being with us.
Thank you, Angie. My pleasure.
Awesome. So now we are going to ask a series of questions to our different panelists. And again, thank you all for being with us. It's a great pleasure to be with you. So, our first question is for Nina Charley. Nina, why do you believe mental health is an important factor in the youth today?
Wow. Well, that's a loaded question to start, I guess. Personally, growing up, I mean, I've struggled for as long as I can remember with mental health and stuff, and I haven't been someone who's expressed it as much because I definitely feel, since I'm a prominent member in society, I have to keep up this image of myself as well. And when I was a kid, you know, we were dancers or we were soccer players or we had to keep this persona of being all together and keeping it together and nothing was wrong. And that could also be cultural things. But I think discussing mental health and mental health awareness for the youth is so important because we have noticed how, without talking about it, we can see a decrease in health and safety for people. And talking about it really is the core foundation for building relationships and building that bridge to get better and heal yourself and come to terms with yourself and that you are experiencing illnesses or, you know, just like you break an arm, something's wrong. You can get it fixed. You can talk about it, right? So I really do think it's a key thing to have that open discussion and take apart that stigma completely, because it's not something any of us should be ashamed about or shamed for. So yeah.
Thank you, Nina. I appreciate that. My next question is for Joanna. Joanna, in your years of experience, what do people say is the hardest thing when it comes to coping with mental illness?
It's really hard to pinpoint it to one, but I'll give top four. So I think the lack of mental health literacy is kind of the big one that I talk about a lot and that we see. Just we don't have education about it. I think we can all look back to things that we learned in grade school, and mental health was not one of them. We can, look back on the things that we talked about and learned, which are important, and apply to things today. But for me, at least, as an elder millennial, that was not something that was talked about at all. And the school counselor was, people didn't take it seriously. It was kind of where you went to leave class and skip out. So it wasn't really something that was talked about. So that's kind of, I guess, the main thing is that the more education we have, just like anything about the world, about sex, about all these things, when we're educated about things and it's talked about, then we have tools, then we have discourse, then we have access and resources, and it's normalized, not just from the individual level, but families, community, political system, and it just keeps going up into all the macro systems. So that's the big one. I would say, in addition, the stigma that we're talking about today is a huge one, but I think that also goes into more education, less stigma. And then just the ups and downs of recovery. It's, tough, and we can have tools and skills and supports and still struggle. And so that can be also a huge barrier sometimes and a struggle because it's not so linear. So those would be, I guess, the top ones that I would say, and access. But yeah, that goes back to education.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanna. Really appreciate that. Our next question is for Ali. Ali, what is your personal experience with stigma?
Yeah, I think very difficult because I think that sometimes for just guys in general, it's I feel like in minority communities, at least, like, or in my community, it's kind of very difficult for guys to just at least speak about how they feel. I think that there's this way of this definition of masculinity that I don't agree with. And that's kind of why I started sort of the podcast, which was called Empathy Always Wins, because I think that people want to win as guys. They're just born in this competitive environment. So I think that my experience with stigma is that it held me back from actually getting the support that I needed. And I think that's the biggest issue with stigma. There was almost this denial, for more than a year. And I think that if you kind of tackle it, the earlier it starts, or the earlier that you start to feel unwell, I think that is a very proactive approach in getting better and living a better quality life. So I think that, what I was able to learn from the whole process was, and that became the sort of the driving force behind like everything that I do, including research and driving sort of the partnerships that I do, with whether it's Microsoft or whether it's all the other companies, was we need to get this information out, because this doesn't make you less of a weaker leader, less of a weaker youth, less of a weaker student. In fact, it only makes you normal, especially in the pandemic and the situations that youth are going through right now. So I think, without taking too much time, I think that the experience of stigma that I faced was even before the pandemic. So if there's anything that I would like to share, is that the silver lining of the pandemic has allowed for more conferences like HealMind to exist. And this is why I love being part of this.
Awesome. Thank you, Ali. Our next question, going back to Nina. Nina, what kind of stigma do you see around mental health in youth?
I think the top one I'd say is that we're kind of expected just to have it all together. And that's just, it's so unobtainable, especially when you're in your like teen years. That's when everything's shifting and everything's, it's just up in the air. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who you are necessarily. You're figuring out your identity. And so I think it's just so difficult for every single person. It's different because you also have to take in different, backgrounds, different races, different sexes, different genders, different sexual orientations, because each person has a different perspective and outlook on how stigma affects them as well. So it's kind of all intertwined, and it's definitely an intersectional thing as well. But I definitely think the main thing is that we're all expected to have it together because we have so much at our fingertips now compared to what people had in the past. So we should necessarily be better and have more access to more things to be better. But it's just not the case. We still are wired differently. It's all chemistry. So
Awesome. Sorry. I do see sometimes from change with generations, it's a different struggle. For us, we do have access to technology, and sometimes that could be a root cause. Thank you, Nina. Our next two questions are for Dr. Ward King. Doctor, what does research say about stigma in youth? And what are the general causes?
Please call me Jessica. And so research tells us that youth are particularly affected by mental health issues, and specifically by mental illness, because a lot of illnesses have their genesis in younger experiences and come out during adolescence and early 20s. And so there's definitely that biological factor there. But in terms of youth getting help for mental illness and for mental health issues, the stigma is the huge thing. And we've noticed during the pandemic that there's been a lot of talk about mental health and mental health issues, but less talk about mental illness and about getting help for mental illness. It's become very normalized that we all talk about mental health and being our best selves and that kind of that kind of stuff. But youth are still very highly stigmatized, and part of that is the self stigma, because we've been hearing Nina talk about that you have to come to a place where you can talk about mental health, and to keep it all together. And that self stigma tells us that if you're not keeping it all together, you're a failure, you're useless. And those are the kinds of things that are already going on in young people's minds. And so it just kind of it compounds it. And then social media compounds it even further, because everybody looks put together on social media, right? Everyone's living their best life. So there's like this huge confluence of things that are affecting young people specifically, and things that haven't affected generations in the past. And so while we are normalizing it slowly but surely, it's not coming fast enough for a lot of youth, and people are falling through the cracks. I can't remember what your second question was, or if I've already answered it.
No worries. It's the general causes of stigma in youth and its ties to research.
Yeah, for sure. So research tells us that there are kind of three aspects of stigma that really contribute to the way that young people deal with mental health and mental illness. One of them is kind of the behavioral aspect. What are other people doing? What is normal for us to do? Is it normal for us to post, a mental health, a good vibes kind of thing on social media, or not in our social group, in our racial group, in our gender and sexual orientation and so on groups? So there's that aspect, that behavioral thing. There's the cognitive aspects, so the way that people think about mental health and mental illness. But the really, really big one is that empathic part of it. And we've heard about this already today. But there's that piece of contact, of being able to have interpersonal contact with another human where you can talk about what's going on with you. And we've lost a lot of that in the pandemic, right? Interpersonal contact tends to be like over Zoom, and it's not the same. So research is going down that rabbit hole now about how youth can be contact to one another, and how bigger organizations can also contribute to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. Now we're going to circle back to Ali. Ali, what do you believe causes stigma in the Middle Eastern community, yourself being part of it?
You know, yeah, for the Middle Eastern community and probably all minority communities have a lot of factors in common, but I think it stems from, you know, beliefs that have been passed on to us, right? Like the way we're taught how to express and our perceptions of mental health. There's certainly a lot of religious ties to mental health, right? There's certainly a lot of like how can you open a conversation if your parents don't believe this thing that's called mental health exists, right? Or that don't have a perception of what it is, or perhaps that they have overcame or have never overcame, and it has become a somatic, a psychosomatic symptom, i.e. it's developed into a physical illness that has been like high blood pressure. Like so many times I'm back in the Middle East, where I hear people who are of our, you know, of the upper generation that go to doctors for health issues, and then they're transferred to a psychologist because they can't put their hands on something. So what I'm trying to say is this has been a belief that I think that sometimes needs us to do the activations that we're doing, such as those conferences, because I think it's very important to know what to take from our cultures and what to love about them, but also know where to unlearn and what to unlearn about our cultures because they no longer serve us. And I think it's so important to realize that there's innovation, there's constant renewal of things with the development of science and new discoveries. And I think what we're talking about here, such as research and those discussions, are so important. So what I would say, just to answer your question in a nutshell, I think is just the beliefs and also the associations that we tie ourselves and how we are raised up. I think that really impacts a lot of how we identify, and it also makes us panic when we feel that something that we can't express, or when we feel like we don't fit in what we are meant to fit in. And I don't think that's ever going to help us moving forward. And I think that this is what we're trying to combat and tackle here together.
Absolutely. There's a ton of factors that go into identity, and some of them, they go hand in hand and they clash, and learning to live with them and to unlearn some things and relearn some new ones is a good thing for mental health sometimes. Now, our next questions are from Myriam. Myriam, as a representative of the Black community in mental health, how does stigma make it harder for you to approach and help young Black men and women?
Yeah. Well, stigma makes it harder because it brings a negative attitude towards mental health, right? And so in our communities, oftentimes you hear that having mental health problems is not for us. It's not for us Black people. It's a white people thing, or you equate it to weakness, right? So having these types of narratives being thrown around, that really makes it harder for us to have these conversations, and it also has a very has detrimental long-term effects on our mental health, right? So if we keep having these discussions, just keep saying these negative or having these negative views on mental health, then it can become harder for us to reach youth and just create more reluctance and just a lack of understanding of what it means to have mental health problems. And so kind of what I think in one of the videos, the introduction, one of the youth was talking about how talking about your mental health doesn't actually make you weak. It actually makes you very strong. And it's very true, because being vulnerable requires a lot of strength for you to choose to open up to somebody that you don't know, basically, right? Or having that shame, maybe that shame is going to come up. You don't know what's going to come up, but choosing to still be vulnerable without really knowing what's going to come after that is very strong, right? That requires a lot of strength. And I think there just needs to be a change of narrative regarding what it means to have mental health problems. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another question for you, what do you believe causes that stigma in the Black community, starting off from the youth and going into adulthood?
So I think we've made a lot of progress, you know, having to have these discussions. Right now you have a lot of people in clinical positions or psychologists who are Black, right? So we made the progress to understand and acknowledge that this is real, but there still is a lot of reluctance. And I think a big part of it goes back to our history And it's understanding that historically Black people have been forced to deny their own sufferings in exchange for survival, right? So because we've only been taught how to survive, we've only been taught how to just meet our basic needs, that's in doing so, we've been able to kind of dismiss the part of us that's hurt, the part of us that's traumatized, so we don't have time for that. Basically, when you're just trying to meet your needs, you're trying to survive. And so oftentimes in counseling therapy, we talk about acknowledging that two things can live within, like, can coexist, right? So you can be in a space of needing to survive, but also needing to acknowledge that you're hurt. And I think that's what we need to do as a community, is acknowledge both. And with that, then we can actually start to move towards thriving rather than just surviving. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That also highlights the impact that colonialism still has on us today, and just on the youth and mental health. And it's very important to talk about that. Thank you, Miriam. Our next question is for Wala. Wala, what is the stigma surrounding mental health for immigrants, like in your experience?
Yeah, so a lot of the stigma has already been touched on, just in terms of like intersectionality that Jessica and Nina kind of alluded to, and the fact there are different parts of ourselves that make it more layered or complex. Also, Ali, I love that you brought up unlearning, challenging beliefs. I think with new immigrants especially, it's kind of like a double whammy, where on one side, we have the racism and discrimination that often happens. We know that like 43% of hate crimes are usually motivated by either hate of a certain race or ethnicity, and that's probably underrepresented. And on that front, a lot of times having experiences of microaggressions daily or experiencing that racism and discrimination results sometimes in internalizing some of that. And when that's the case, and when we feel like something is inherently wrong with us as people, sometimes it's hard to think that that any help out there will be beneficial, or to trust someone enough to ask for the help. On the other end, when we talk about immigrant communities and arriving, a lot of times that culture, the collective culture, is so important, that family and community and their opinions hold such an important place in someone's life. And there's a fear of being judged, or the stigma, or how people are going to be spoken about, and where do they fit in then? I need to belong. And if I'm experiencing racism and discrimination in certain circles, I need to have a place where I feel safe and away from that toxic environment. And that stigma sometimes keeps people from reaching out. And there's another piece that Myriam kind of alluded to as well, the survival. So when someone first immigrates, whether they're a refugee or not, there's a lot of resettlement, and that stuff takes time. It's challenging. Different people in the family are dealing with different stages of it as well. So it's so layered that often when families, or when youth go to families and say, I need help with this, I'm struggling with mental health, they feel very dismissed, or mental health is seen as not important, because their parents or families are trying to deal with issues of housing, the job market, different practical things on the ground that they're trying to deal with that are more survival based, that mental health often takes a backseat. So I think it's a combination of the experiences of like our systemic racism, different experiences day to day, but also that collective culture and the stigma that exists in some of the cultures that Ali kind of alluded to, with the beliefs and unlearning.
Awesome. Thank you, Wala. And our next question goes back to Ali. Ali, do you believe the intergenerational stigma within the Middle Eastern community can completely go away? And if so, how can we go about doing this?
Yeah, I completely, I mean, this is the belief or the premise that I have doing the work that we're doing. I mean, as a collective, even just by being a part of this incredible event. I think that it starts by us. I think it starts by us youth. I think right now we have tools that are really powerful, that can really create exponential change. We're seeing things that are happening right now at rapid speeds just because of I'm pretty sure what we are talking about right now with Walet's comments and Nina and Miriam and Jessica and Joanna, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing that we all agree upon a certain phenomenon that needs to be changed. And it's just a matter of time where I think youth find themselves within a community that they find their voice within. And I think that this is where, when it just happens, it's going to happen. And we've already seen what has happened with climate change. We've already seen the widespread of numbers. We've already seen how that has happened in different areas, and how that has really created, if not a direct change, but has created exponential awareness. So I think that while our parents, or while the older generation might not necessarily agree, I think it's about time that we are gonna be seeing more change and more digital safe spaces taking shape. And that is what's gonna allow more youth to be courageous to speak up. Because I think when there's conversation, when there's discourse, there is a chance to have an opinion. And I don't think many people feel like they have the permission within themselves to have an opinion, because they may not be on a stage or a panel like we are today. But I also think that it's also one's own responsibility to actually have that discourse with someone that they might find comfort speaking with. And I think that that's where we all kind of will start to realize that change is about to happen. But I think we've seen it before. And I think that this is the optimism and the hope that I carry in the work that we're all doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ali. It really starts with us. We've always been told that we're the generation of change, and we might as well be. And this, I believe this conference also helps us kickstart it and get in the right direction. Our next question is for Nina. Nina, what kind of strategies do you believe can be taken to get rid of the stigma within youth communities?
Open discussion. I think it really just has to start with open discussion, and it has to start with people talking with their friends and feeling comfortable and being in comfortable spaces, providing those spaces in school systems, especially. I know my school experience was very traumatic. Also community spaces. We, Rise Bridge, we came into the community after we were noticing that there was a lack of certain programs that weren't being offered. There was nowhere for BIPOC youth to go. There was nowhere for hair braiding for any Black girls, any Black men, like anyone. There was no women's empowerment, really. There was no men's empowerment. We really were wanting to provide that space and have that platform to have open discussions with everyone, especially youth and BIPOC youth primarily, because that is a group that we notice have the least amount of discussion. So I truly believe the most important thing is creating that open discussion for all youth and having that safe space to do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina. Next question is for Jessica. Jessica, what are some actions taken by the government to change the stigma around mental health, and what kind of resources are out there for youth?
So the government, there are so many levels of government, and I'm sure that folks in municipal settings in your cities and towns and and small rural areas have seen actions there, days proclaimed and conferences held. Provincial governments are responsible for the healthcare system, which currently doesn't much include mental health care systems. So there's a lot of actions to be taken there, but still a lot that's going on. In the federal jurisdiction, which is where I'm kind of seated right now, there's certainly a lot of awareness campaigns that are happening, but most of what I see that's really useful to youth from federal government as well as provincial is having those grants and contributions go towards youth serving organizations. And it might be an organization such as Kids Help Phone, which serves youth up into their 20s. It could be someone or an organization like the YM or the YWCAs that provide those spaces and provide those programs and those grants for smaller organizations to, as has been noted, like get places for BIPOC youth to go and get resources for them to access. And so I would be, if I were, when I was young, I'm old now, but when I was young, I was looking more to those youth serving organizations that were really accessible to me, because government seems less accessible, but those organizations in our communities are much more accessible. And I just wanted to point out as well, for Indigenous communities, there is a need to have Indigenous oriented and Indigenous run services available. And so the government helps with those kinds of services and organizations as well as for newcomer youth, homeless youth, for BIPOC youth in general. These intersectionalities that we see really do have an effect on how we can deal with our mental health and mental illness, and the government is really attuned to that. So in a shorter answer, I'm an academic, I talk a lot, but in a shorter answer to your question, it's, I think, government supports in budget asks and in supports and grants and contributions to youth serving organizations that are the most accessible to you.
Awesome, thank you. It's important for all levels of government to be working with each other to make sure that communities, wherever they are reached. And because youth is everywhere, we are everywhere, and even with adults, mental health matters everywhere. So thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. Next question is for Miriam. Miriam, how do you've mentioned already intergenerational trauma and survival mode. You have to put mental health aside because you're in survival mode. How do you believe in other ways does intergenerational trauma tie into such stigma with mental health?
So good question. So when we talk about like intergenerational trauma, it's really what happened to our ancestors and how that gets passed down to the next generations, right? And that can be done through their behaviors that they learned or the environment that created that trauma. And so there's like a whole field called like epigenetics, where like they talk about the how the physical environment and the behaviors and how how that influences our gene expression. So it doesn't change the sequence, but it just influences how our genes and how we're going to react to the same environment that our brain is learning to adapt to. And so, going back to kind of what Wala was saying, where you come and you immigrate into a new country, right? You don't have time to think of or process the trauma. All you have to do is think of housing. You have to think of try to find employment, how to feed the kids, right? Because you're most likely not coming alone. If you're fleeing a country because of war, political instabilities, natural disasters, and all these different things. And so because the trauma is not processed, right, it gets stored in the body. It stays in us, in the subconscious, and then that influences how we how we cope with everyday life stresses, right? So the smallest thing can just elevate us, and we're not able to cope properly. And so when we go back to like the idea of our trauma being passed down to the next generation, right? It's the idea that you can have a new generation of kids who are anxious, depressed, they have all these different mood disorders without really knowing why. And so they'll say like, yeah, I just know that I've always been anxious. Since I was a little kid, but there's no like concrete explanation. And then that's when you have to look back at, okay, what happened in the previous generations that created this this anxiety, this depression, and all these different just mood disorders. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, yes. And
Yeah.
I have another one for you as well.
Okay, yeah.
What is the key of letting go of all that trauma and to unlearn all these things and no longer holding shame and self-blame that has been learned for years.
Yeah. I think that a big part of it has to be us understanding what mental health looks like for us as a community, and knowing that it might look different than what is typically said about having mental health problems, right? So for example, as a Black community, in the Black community, you often hear people talk about having more physical ailments rather than mental ailments, right? So they can have shoulder pains, back pains, extra like extreme fatigue and all these different things. They're all signs of mental health, having mental health problems, but we're not taught that aspect of things. We think it's more mental rather than physical, right? And I forget who it was exactly who was saying that they go to the doctors and the doctors goes and sends them to a psychologist because it's not tangible, but it's the same thing, right? And so there needs to be more education on what it can look like and know that it is different for us as a community. I think also just education, like at the high school level, again, it has to be institutional. It has to be at the institution level, right? So I remember like in high school having those like 0.5 credits for those little classes where like it's not that it was useless, but like I'm not doing anything with it now, right? And it's like, why not use those credits and educate youth about their mental health? Because oftentimes when you're in high school, that's when you're dealing with the most changes. That's where you need to know, that's where you have to build the awareness around what's happening with you, how you need to cope, and knowing that the way you need to cope might be different from somebody else's, and that's okay. So just having that education and just also having a bit more compassion and understanding for the previous generations and their own experiences with their traumas, and knowing that like whatever happened to them isn't a reflection of me, right? And that kind of helps to separate one from the blame that we might hold, that it's our fault if this is happening. Well, it's not. It's because of there's a lot of factors to take into consideration, and that's what we need to take in. That's what we need to implement more.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I really appreciate that. And our next set of questions is for Joanna. Joanna, a similar question to what I've asked to Miriam. What is the key, in your opinion, to letting go also of trauma and no longer holding shame and self-blame?
Complicated, as a lot of these questions are. There definitely isn't one solution. I think when we think about talking about mental health, and to Jessica's point, also mental illness, because not we all have a mental health, but that doesn't mean we all have a mental illness or the propensity to develop one. It's kind of like physical health. We all have one, and then illnesses exist on the spectrum. But yeah, in order to eliminate, I think we think a lot about mental health or mental illness recovery as an individual responsibility, and that is so problematic. We point the blame onto a child or onto the adolescent or onto a parent, and it's just so much more complicated than that. We have to zoom out and look at all these issues that we're talking about today. Access, wealth disparities, trauma, oppression, the political climate, fat phobia, like all these things that create mental health issues and disorders and cognitive impairments, and lack of body safety and trust in ourselves as people or women or men or youth or however we identify. So while we can do so much work on eliminating shame within ourselves, we're also swimming upstream against a culture that literally teaches us to feel ashamed and to suppress and to withdraw. So it's so complicated. And there, of course, are modalities, and healing is possible. And I strongly believe that we can, but we're not just individuals. We are communities and families and humans together. So it does have to work both ways and work together from kind of this bigger standpoint and talking about these things, but also the individual level. So therapy is great, and it's not the only solution, because that's still an individual focus. So we need policies, we need education, we need government changes. So very complicated, but I think we're all talking about the same thing here and recognizing that it isn't linear. There's so much bio-individuality within all of us, which just means we're all different. And we also need to feel safe in our mind and have our bodies trust that. Just like Myriam was talking about, our bodies are incredible and they hold so much for us. But if they don't feel safe because our community is not safe, because we experience discrimination, because we don't have fair wages, access to housing, all of these things, yeah, our mental health is going to struggle and mental illness would make sense.
Thank you, Joanna. My next question is, along with therapy, what do you believe could be some methods to cope with mental illness? Because, you know, obviously we can't get rid of it entirely, right? What is a way to cope with it? And not only go to therapy, what are some things that can improve our lives as well with that?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I'm, as a therapist myself, I'm biased, and I think therapy should be accessible for everyone. And I think we probably all agree here. But yeah, we can learn so much, right? We can challenge the beliefs and narratives that we're taught. We can work on understanding our thought patterns and where those come from. We can heal trauma and traumatic experiences. We can seek safety within ourselves, work on our self-worth, and do all of these things with a therapist. Or a group therapist, or whatever modality feels right for us. And I always say to my clients and anyone that, you know, there's so much more than this hour we spend weekly. And I know that there's a lot of equality issues and access issues. But if we are able to implement routines in our daily life that can anchor us, like that one video that I loved, the youth was sitting outside and you could just envision what they were experiencing, just sitting in the grass and grounding themselves and feeling the breeze. And so having access to safe spaces, that's another macro issue, but being able to move our bodies in ways that are joyful, stimulating, kind, respectful to our bodies, having interpersonal relationships, like we need one another, we need hugs, we need physical touch, and we realize that. We knew that, but we realized issues with that and the consequences and implications of not having that during the pandemic, right? Not seeing people and not touching someone else for months, weeks. I mean, it's so impactful for us. And as humans, we so need that. And so in the absence of others and the isolation we experience, and you know, this social media culture, which there's pros to it and so many benefits, and also it's also made us feel more lonely and isolated. So lots of different ways, like I mentioned, therapy, healthy routines, moving our bodies, medication is incredibly helpful, and it's different for every person. What works for someone might not work for everyone else. So we can't apply that just because one thing helped someone else, it will help, you know, every single person. But it is possible to recover. And although there might not be a cure to some mental disorders, maintaining and having a healthy life that is fulfilling is entirely possible. But again, so complicated in so many factors. But as long as we can anchor ourselves with the routines that we have and have access to resources, relationships, a safe home, various factors here.
Awesome, thank you. It all really plays into one another, and sometimes we just have to take it one day at a time and figure out what we have to do from there. Thank you, Joanna. Another question for Ali. Ali, in your experience, what were the things that helped you realize that you needed to take care and nurture your mental health?
I think, I mean, it was a little bit extreme for me because, you know, my background was very hard to admit. And I think that this is something that, you know, drove me to do the work that I do today. It went to a point where I went to Ryerson University, and because I have a 25% hearing disability, so I had to sit at the front of class. And because I wasn't really admitting of my physical deterioration, my state, suddenly I realized that friends next to me were starting to tell me, "Why are you showing up to class high?" And I never smoked weed at that time. It was just my second year university. And that was when I realized that, wow, like I have totally lost touch of my surroundings. And sometimes you need that sometimes wake up call to realize that, hey, look, this is not me now, like convincing myself, this is me, I need to take some serious action here, because it can get worse. And that's when I realized that it wasn't in my head. And I think that the lesson I learned here is that sometimes you need people, as Joanna was saying, just to reaffirm yourself and your existence. And I think that in minority communities, when we don't have people to talk to, and that was a big challenge at at the time that I in the time that I experienced that, I had barely any friends because I had moved to downtown, and I found it very hard making, and that was part of my struggle. So I think that that was my experience, and I think that it was just eye-opening to know that that was when I needed to take action. And I must admit that when I did admit that this was something I needed to solve, or a challenge that I needed to kind of take action, I did feel a lot more empowered, and I did feel a lot more, and that's why I call my company Empower, because I also want to touch on the fact that vulnerability is so hard. It's so hard to admit that you are weak in one moment of time. I came from a background where I swam in the world championships. I won a talent show at school. I saw myself so highly that I couldn't allow myself to be below a certain level. And I think to understand that you're a human is to understand that you can be at the lowest level and not view yourself any less of. And I think Dr. Jessica was saying the self-stigma is just huge in youth. And I think that for us to hold space for one another can be what can change lives. And it's peer support is something I truly believe is very important for us youth. And I think that the safe space or digital safe spaces can come such a long way for many of those that don't have access to the safe homes that Joanna was talking about. And I think that's what we as a collective need to kind of work on to be there. Yeah.
Totally agree. We need a broad range of resources to help with broad range of mental health issues and backgrounds and, home situations. Thank you, Ali. Next question is for Nina. Nina, as a student, what kind of problems do you encounter that stop you from taking care of your mental health? I feel like that happens to us a lot.
I think especially for students nowadays, we strive to kind of achieve burnout in a way, because we feel like when we burn out, that means we're doing our best job. And if we don't burn out, that means we're not trying hard enough, and we're not, sorry, there's an ambulance. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but okay. Sorry about that. But yeah, burnout. And I noticed that in myself a lot. I was, at one point I was working 7 days a week at 2 jobs. I was doing school full time. I was then going and helping coaching school teams at my old high school and helping teaching dance classes. So I was, I developed like a major caffeine addiction, and I was having like heart palpitations, and I almost like had a heart attack on the bus. Like I would show up to work and I'm like, guys, I think I'm gonna die right now. Like this is not healthy. But in my mind, I was also like, yeah, I'm being super successful. Like this is what I need to do. I in my past, I would, sit in my bed and I was like, I hate my life. I don't want to do anything. I hate school. And so it was like I did a complete flip and 180, and it was just, it's kind of bonky on your mind in a way, because you're going from one extreme to another and you don't really know what the middle ground is, especially. And I think we need to stop glamorizing burnout in especially university students, because it's so unhealthy, and you can see how it just takes so much away from you, and you lose yourself in it. You really lose yourself in it, and you just start becoming a zombie. And I know, especially like for people who suffer from mental illness like myself, it just takes this incredible toll on you, and it's one of the hardest things to come back from, for sure. So yeah, that's probably.
Absolutely. Having that work-life balance is so important, and it's something that some of us forget to do sometimes. I know, like, I'm a second-year student, and a lot of my friends are like, okay, don't forget to go out, see your friends, and take some time for yourself. Because sometimes it just get lost. Like, we're so obsessed on the next step, and like, just, oh, I want to go to med school, I want to do this, I want to do that. Then we forget to take care of ourselves in the process. So it's really important to have that work-life balance. Thank you, Nina. And I have a question for Wala. Well, a lot of immigrants, especially youth immigrants, come to Canada with the pressure to make their lives better. And this causes a lot of stress. But for most, it's also taken as a good thing. How can we change that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think it kind of builds on Nina's point about striving for burnout. I'm doing better. I'm being a better family member if I'm trying to do it all. And something I really have to highlight is the guilt factor, because there's usually that guilt of, I want to make my parents proud. I want to make the sacrifice worth it. I don't want to let them down or disappoint them. And when those narratives are there, or those beliefs about what my role is, a lot of times nothing feels enough. And then on the flip side, if we are doing better for ourselves, there's that guilt of, my parents didn't have this opportunity. So one point I really want to talk about before I go into like some things that might help, we've mentioned shame before in the conversation, is the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt can be healthy if I'm seeing guilt as something about this action didn't fit well for me. Something about this action isn't in line with who I want to be as a person or my values, so I'd like to change this action. Shame is more, something is inherently wrong with me. I am the problem. And when we come from that place, there's no solution. How do I fix me? So we get kind of stuck. So one thing I always suggest for clients is to really start by noticing when guilt and shame show up. Call them out. We need to start with the self-awareness piece. If we can notice when guilt is there and try to explore it, and this looks different for different people. So some people will write it out and journal. Some people like to draw some kind of like visual, whatever works for you, but try to give yourself some time to kind of sit with the shame and the guilt and explore what it's trying to say, where is it coming from? And sometimes this is really hard to do on your own. And this is when maybe talking to a friend or seeking out a mental health professional might be beneficial. But I think that's the first step, the awareness of it first, of what's motivating me, because motivation isn't bad. But if it's driven by shame and guilt, there's only so far you can go, and the cycle will continue where you get stuck, and then it feels like I'm not doing enough, I must be a bad person, I'm not doing enough, my parents, and it's just like, it's endless, right? So I think the self-awareness is number one. And then the question of, what do I have control over? Because when I have conversations with children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, especially the youth, often they're trying to take control or responsibility for things that are not in their control. So are you trying to take your responsibility for your parents' past, or a certain family member's personality, or systemic issues? So really stopping and saying, what am I trying to control here? What am I holding myself responsible for? Is it actually in my control? And I think from there, and this is a sentiment that's been, I think, echoed by almost everyone today, is talking to other people. So whether it's other immigrants or children of immigrants, talking to people that can relate to your experience, normalizing the conversations, having them at different levels. Like I always talk about different circles in our lives. If you can talk to someone within family, if that's safe, and then you have your friend group, larger society, we need to have these conversations on different levels for it to be normalized. I think the last point is really self-compassion. And I'm making these really, I could probably talk on and on about each of these points, but honestly, with self-compassion, just cut yourself some slack. No, none of us are perfect. And you're not on your own. So many people feel this way. And I think that's kind of in a nutshell. That's as fast as I can give it. That's like the, the summary, if that's even possible for this question.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's just, again, a lot of factors, and it's forgiving ourselves and just being like, hey, I'm doing this for myself, and everyone's in it for ourselves. Like on the long run, it's our mental health. So that's a good point. Thank you, Ola. And next question is for Joanna. Now we notice sometimes that, like, yes, we might be doing good, but our friend, it might be struggling. How do we go about helping a friend who might be dealing with mental illness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the number one thing is offering empathy and just believing what they're telling you. I think we can sometimes, again, center ourselves when other people are telling us things. I'm like, oh, did you try this? Try exercising. That's not helpful. It's coming from a helpful place. But if someone is telling you they're struggling, just listen, ask them what that's like. Recognize that you don't know how that feels, but can they help you understand? Can they describe it? And as friends, while I was talking about, there's different circles. So if it's a very close friend that you have an intimate relationship with, can you create time with them so that you can go on a walk or just hang out on the couch, or do whatever they need? If it's someone that may not be like the closest in proximity to you, can you encourage them to reach out or get support or ask what they would need? But I think it's best when we just take ourselves out of what this means for us, and just help that person, listen to them, believe them, empathize with them, offer compassion for their struggle, even if you can't relate, or if you can relate, then there's another opportunity for bonding there and normalizing what their experience is. But validation and empathy goes such a long way.
Absolutely. I remember in the video that was introducing us, or the just starting the ceremony, I remember it was like, oh, it felt more like a competition. It's like, who's more traumatized, right? But again, it's not because we're in full body casts that our friend's broken arm doesn't hurt, So yeah, it's very important, and having a lot of empathy for those people, and always offering help and resources, being the person you wish you could have for them, is important. Thank you, Joanna.
Mm-hmm.
And our next question is for Wala. So there's a lot of prejudice coming in the immigrant communities. Just seeing someone from a family not doing so well and everything, or just, seeing someone else just being like, they're just not doing good. What are some ways to reduce that prejudice?
Okay. So first of all, I think once we see a family member or so a close loved one that isn't doing well, often I always tell people to check in with themselves first in terms of what's showing up for them. Because sometimes when we're trying to think of having these conversations with other people or even providing support, if we're very activated, it's hard to be present and actually have the conversation. This is where sometimes we find that things get heated, even if you have an important point to make, and the point doesn't get across because different emotions show up. So I always tell people to first make sure that they're kind of aware of where they're at, maybe take some space, whether that's grounding, speaking to someone before they try to address anything or have the conversation. The second piece is also to try to meet people where they're at. So especially when there's prejudice, often we just want to call it out. That's not okay. This is my stance on it. Make where I stand clear. But if the person in front of you has certain beliefs or understandings that kind of get in the way, then we have to look at how we're expressing ourselves or how we're communicating that. And a huge part of that is the languaging. And this is something that I personally had to work on a lot the more I worked with diverse populations and especially refugees. So even though I'm Egyptian Canadian, I speak Arabic, I understand the culture, I was Canadian born. And a lot of times the way I express myself or how I would explain mental health is very different than experiences of some of the refugees that were coming in that I was seeing, even though I had the language capacity. So a lot of what we were looking at is like, how do I word it? How do I word it to make it less threatening? How do I word it to make it more about the human being and less about these like big topics? So I think that's number one, to kind of see where we're at first, and then really look at the person in front of me. How can I language this? How can I make the conversation more productive?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wala. Now I think our individual questions are over. And now I have a general question for each of the panelists. We'll start with Jessica. So Jessica, how do we get people to actually care about their mental health as a professional in your field?
How do we get people to care about mental health as a person who works for government, as an academic, as a researcher? It is, from my point of view, really making those voices be able to be heard. So from my point of view as like working at government, it's being able to empower young people to actually pursue this line of thought. And so it's being able to fund, for example, organizations such as this, to get HealMind off the ground, to get I'm seeing Ali Empower, to really empower young people to take control of their own narratives about mental health, and that's gets people invested. It's going to be super corny, but investing can get people invested, and being able to validate those points of view and making them something that is worthwhile and also worthwhile is really something that's super important. And we can also get young people, and this is from my perspective as a person with mental illness, a person with bipolar 2 disorder, we can get young people and people that are struggling with their mental health invested in figuring that out for themselves by, as we've been saying over and over again, but it's worth pointing out again, reducing the stigma, because folks aren't going to buy into something that is so dangerous and so inherently difficult to actually pursue and to accomplish. So yeah, those two things, giving people, the young people, their own voice gets them invested and gets the community invested, and then also reducing that stigma allows people to enter into that conversation and to really get themselves invested. And I know that's what happened for me as well when I kind of came to the realization I had mental illness and trying to get into it. Those two things really figured prominently for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Next, Ali. So as a member of the Middle Eastern community and as well as being, ex-student, former pro athlete, how do we get people to actually care about their mental health in some ways that could also personally affect you?
You know what? That's a question I ask myself every day, and it's always changing. But like, it's something that I think we need more. And I know we keep hearing this from time to time, representation. But what I mean by representation, I mean champions in the community. I mean, like, we need more people that, the biggest challenge that I had personally was I never saw like a man, or like a man that I perceive to be masculine or in my culture that I define and look up to speak about that. So I never found a role model that I could really sort of walk in those steps. So it was a blueprint that I had to figure out, which was why like I came up with this idea and I came up with all those things. To me, I think that we need more people that we can feel and relate to. And I think the issue with identity is something that I feel that everyone has a place and everyone can find their place when they find that it's not so much shameful. But one thing that I also want to say is I think that we also need to make sure that young people from minority communities aren't scared of accessing support, because one thing that I am realizing from young people in our communities, in minority communities, because of the lack of understanding of and the lack of accessibility, sometimes they fear not being understood by even professionals. And I think that getting people to understand what it is, even myself, not coming or not having a Canadian background, I was very scared to talk about how I feel to somebody because of this association that we have from our parents around either, like, for example, like this person is gonna play with your mind, or you're very vulnerable and all those things. So I think that, it might sound funny, but it is actually a reality. And I say this from someone who was not born in Canada. I say this as a newcomer. And I say this from a perspective of many of those who come to Canada. So I think it's important for us to have people who show that level of vulnerability and give them a voice.
Awesome. Thank you, Ali. And I'm going to ask the same question to Myriam. Myriam, how do we, as a prominent member in mental health for Black people in Black communities, how do we get people to care and understand their mental health better?
Yeah, so if I'm going to be honest, I think to get people to care about their mental health is to help get people to understand and to take care of themselves as a whole. So if you just help people understand what their needs are, understand what it is that they need at this given moment, or whatever that may look like, that can really help people to just care for their mental health, because they all relate, they all kind of come together. And so oftentimes, we're taught how to care for others, but we're not taught how to care for ourselves. And kind of going back to what I was saying, like when you're wanting to go care for somebody, kind of take that moment to check in with yourself and see like, okay, why do I want to do this, right? So it's that understanding and that awareness piece. And like, right now the big buzzword is like self-care, right? So that caring piece, that's really what we need to be able to focus on. Like, how do I actually care for myself, even if, I don't really know how to. It doesn't have to be like big things, but it can really just be the smallest thing that can make a difference. And that's what I think, that's how we need to at least start. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Myriam. And next is Nina. Nina, as a student and as a member of the BIPOC community, how do we get people to really care about their mental health?
I'm gonna build off what Ali said, because representation is such a huge thing. And for myself personally, coming from mixed race background, I didn't have any therapists or doctors who were BIPOC, because I'm on Vancouver Island, right? So it's limited. So when I was bringing up all of my racial traumas, racial harassments, everything like that, they kind of stood back and they were like, I don't really know about this. I've never had anyone experience this. I don't really know what to do, kind of thing. Or, they're shocked by it. And it's like, but that's not a shocking thing to me. Like, this is my reality, right? I'm used to this every single day. Like, I'm coming to you because I need your help to help me declutter what's in my brain because of it, right? I don't need to teach you how to do your job. But I think what's so important is having more licensed BIPOC therapists, doctors in all areas around Canada, especially. And for students, I think we all just have to take a step back sometimes, separate ourselves from our education, and understand that we are still people. We're not just students. We aren't just people like trying to just get a degree and get into a system and then keep doing that, and that we're just completely irrelevant. We are still people who need to take care of ourselves and need to take care of our mental health, mental illness, everything. So that's what I'd probably say. And yes, in the USA too, we absolutely need BIPOC representation. We need it all around the world, baby. Like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nina. Joanna, as a psychotherapist, in your perspective, how do we get people to really care and understand their mental health?
Obviously going to echo what everyone else said, but I'll speak more on the individual level, even though it's not an individual fault here if you struggle. But I think it takes having that be normalized, right? If we saw our parents talk about depression or anxiety or mental health in general or therapy, and that trickled generationally, right? That would probably look different, and it would be just something we do, just like we make sure we get our greens in or drink enough water or get good sleep. Like, if these are things that we just see as part of wellness for prevention, that would help if it's modeled by our communities and cultures. And even though a lot of these issues, again, like we've been talking about, are these broader systems that impact then the individual, while those are being worked on, while all of us are trying to do our best as like agents of change and social justice warriors, we can also take care of ourselves day to day. I know that's not always easy. I know there's so many barriers with school and stress and employment and all these things that we've talked about today. But if we can just identify and ask yourself, like, what is not working for me? Like Nina said, do I need to point out when I'm feeling burnt out before it's even at that point, right? Just like if we're so thirsty, we're already dehydrated. Our stomach is growling, we should have eaten an hour ago. So we have to be able to identify, like, what is not working? Do I need to, prioritize myself? Do I need to step outside sometimes? Do I need to get fresh air? Do I need to move my body? Do I need to have more diversity in the foods I'm eating? What do we need? And so even though I know health is not all within our control, and it's only like 23% or something that is within what we can do, but we can work on it and we can get help and seek support, whether again, it's therapy or all these other routines that we can implement in our daily life. And I'm just so glad that we're in this culture that has a lot of issues, but is changing. It truly is. And I see that on Instagram. I see that in like children and youth that are talking about this more. It will take time, but it is changing. And so if you can just help yourself and ask yourself, like, what am I needing? What is not working for me? What would it look like to feel more peace in my life or more balance? Life won't be free of pain. It won't be free of anxiety. You will never not experience moments of depression, but struggle is part of the reality, and we can also support ourselves and not experience like huge levels of distress. It just depends. So yeah, take care of yourself. It's hard. It's not always easy. It's uncomfortable. Self-care isn't always the like yummy stuff like a bath or relaxing. Sometimes it's opening the mail and paying that bill, or telling a doctor or a therapist how you're feeling, or telling your mom, or setting a boundary with a friend. So sometimes it's the really hard stuff that really helps.
Thank you, Joanna. And finally, voila. In your personal experiences, how did you get people to care about mental illness, if you've had that experience with peers and everything? And how do you believe that we can also, as a community, do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of you already touched on it, but I think the main two things that I always think about is how I bring it to people and how I make it relevant. So I'm not expecting everyone to go to therapy. I don't think it's necessarily the solution, even though I'm a therapist. But it's bringing it to people in the sense of, how do we get the education to people in a way that it's relevant? And the reason I was so excited, I don't know if you saw my reaction when people kept mentioning representation, is because that's a huge part of how we do it. Joanna said modeling. I think the reason representation works because of the modeling. So my experience myself, as soon as I was out there on social, my inbox, I was having people from community, both like Arab, Muslim community, messaging me and asking me questions. And as soon as I'd say, oh yeah, I've been to therapy and this was my experience of this, and this is what I thought, and these were the challenges, everyone was opening up and asking how to get past the stigma to be able to take that step, or how I understood this concept. The conversation started. And I think conversation is really what we need to get started. So when someone sees someone that looks like them, is from their background, understands the culture, they're a lot more likely to seek out the education or take that step. So getting that information out there in creative ways, whether it's the languaging I was talking about earlier, whether it's metaphors, technology, tools. That's why I was really excited about the character HealMind when Drayton told me about it. I'm like, that's so cool. It's a sticker and you can scan it and the resources are so much more accessible. It's things like that where we're making it easier for people to get the information, and we're bringing it to them instead of expecting them to walk into my office. There has to be alternatives to the therapy room. And that's how I think we do. And it's an ongoing, like Annie mentioned, he's constantly revisiting and trying to figure out what that looks like. I think it's the same for me. I think the two major themes are bringing it to people and making it relevant, but it's a constant work in progress.
Awesome, thank you. And seeing in the chat that Ali had to go, but thank you, Ali, for joining. Okay, I don't think you can hear that now, but thank you. And thank you all for such an answer. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the panel to have answered all these questions in such extensive manners. It is now time for you, dear audience, to drop any mental health related questions you have for our panelists in the Q&A box. And I'll be personally asking them on your behalf to our panelists. If you want me to ask to a specific panelist, make sure to mention their name along with your question. So we're just going to give you a little bit of time. And I really appreciate all these people sharing their personal experiences in the chat. It just demonstrates what a broad range of people that we have spectating. Awesome. We have a question from Anna Steinberg. So Anna says, how can we support the mental health of our coworkers and employees with this kind of new digital era where they're not able to have those social breathers, or where it may be more difficult to enforce stronger boundaries, such as the workday ending? So would anyone like to answer? Jessica?
Yeah, can I jump in there?
Yeah.
So working in workplace well-being, one of the main ports of call is managers or supervisors or the leaders that are in your organization. And as leaders, it's really important that we model good mental health behavior. So for example, I've had some leaders in the past who went on vacation and during vacation sent emails, sometimes sent emails at 10 o'clock at night during vacation. And while that may be something that they find soothing in order to catch up on what's going on and really get a handle on what they're going to be coming back to, or whatever the case is, as leaders, they were supposed to be modeling what employees are intended to be doing. And so being able to create those boundaries and being able to literally say to people, not only, you don't have to send emails on your vacation, but I'm going to, because that's what we expect here. It's to be able to say, okay, I have to show what the behavior is supposed to be. So, and I want to leave a lot, I could say so much on this, but I want to leave time for my fellow panelists. But that would be one of the ports of call, is the leaders in that field and the managers in that company really, evidencing what we want people to be doing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. Would any of our other panelists like to answer this amazing question?
I can jump in.
For sure. Hola, and then Joanna.
I love the idea of modeling it. Something else that has come up, especially with COVID, is we've had people reach out in different like workplace teams, government, and they were talking about the need, especially with COVID and everything happening in the news, for these safe spaces as teams, where they'd schedule a certain time and they'd come together, and it would be like a safe space where people would just talk about what they were feeling, how the news was weighing on them, how they were coping with COVID, and giving them that space to do it where there wasn't any specific expectation or judgment. So sometimes that helps as well in terms of just setting the tone of that supportive environment where the team members feel like they're supporting each other as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ola. Joanna, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is coming from having friends, family members, clients that I've seen a spectrum of really supportive workplace environments, and then ones that it's just so frustrating and so anger provoking to see, the treatment or the lack of modeling or the type of like unwellness in a workplace dynamic. And it's so complicated, but I tend to think about it as if like we don't need more. In the US, there's a huge culture around these, benefits that are provided for work, like you have a yoga room, or we'll take a mindful break together. And that's great. I'm not poo-pooing that. But I do think like if we are seen and heard as humans and we feel like cared for as people, we will do our work and we will do a great job and we will show up 100%. But if we're expected to overwork, or someone says, oh, you came in 10 minutes late, like, what's that about? If we feel scrutinized, micromanaged, then we're not going to feel well, and we're not going to feel safe. We're not going to feel supported at work. So, it's not always possible, but having conversations at work and asking for what you need. If you need to, come in later some days and compensate for that because you want to go to a movement class, or if you have kids at home, or if you're in college and, need whatever you're needing, like advocating for yourself. That's not always easy. That's not always received well. But just trying to have those conversations and asking for what you need so that you can feel like you can show up for work or your class or your relationships, like whatever it is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joanna. I also feel like you can call in sick to work if you have like a cold or, a fever, but you can't call in sad to work, and having that time for yourself is really important. And sometimes even having exemptions, understanding as like, as someone in the workplace to have to accommodate to people. Sometimes like, religious exemptions are still important for family time, which is also playing in mental health. So it's so much deeper than, mental health, the wellness week. Like, tell me about your experience with mental health. But yeah, thank you so much. Miriam and Nina, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you guys answered that really well. I don't know.
Awesome.
I'm with Nina on that one.
Awesome. So that's all the time that we have for live Q&A. I will now invite our CEO and organizer, Drayton, who has a few words to say for closure.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say I am so happy with how everything turned out. I'm really sorry we didn't have enough time for more live Q&A, but if you have any questions, please let us know. We will contact the panelists personally, and we'll make sure that your questions are answered. Again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're having a little giveaway, and for people who attended, we have a special treat, whereas you can enter the giveaway and you get 10 extra entries, which may guarantee you a nice hoodie. And yeah, so if you are interested, please leave your name and your Instagram handle in the chat, and we will look through it, and we can recognize you. And also, just to end on an even more exciting note, we have a performance by Yannick, who is a singer and songwriter in Ottawa, and he's been making music for 10 years. So I'm really looking forward to that. He'll be performing one song, so please stick around till the end. And yeah, this virtual stage is yours, Yannick.
Hey guys, how's it going? You guys can hear me? Awesome. Great clinic. That was awesome. I watched the whole thing while I'm at work. Just want to add, I'm a big fan of meditation. A nice reset can do wonders. And this is what helps me the most for my mental health. So I love to teach people. Like I want everyone to like get to experience this leisure, because it can help in so many ways. So if anyone wants to contact me and like ask for, like, I give free lessons and stuff. I love sharing what I know. So don't be shy. Just hit me up, send me a message or something, and then I'll teach you what I know. So yeah, here's a song that can help when you're feeling down. I might lose my mind, waiting till the sun down, riding all these heights, waiting for the calm down. Walk these streets with me, I'm doing decently, just glad that I can breathe. Yeah, I'm trying to realize it's alright to not be fine on your own. Now I'm shaking, drinking all this coffee. These last 2 weeks weeks have been exhausting. I'm lost in my imagination. And there's one thing that I need from you. Can you come through? Ain't got much to do. Too old for my hometown. Went to bed at noon. Couldn't keep my phone down. Scrolling patiently. It's all the same to me. Just faces on a screen. Yeah. I'm trying to realize it's alright to not be fine on your own. Now I'm shaking, drinking all this coffee. These last few weeks have been exhausting. I'm lost in my imagination. And there's one thing that I need from you. Can you come through? Yeah. Yeah, there's one thing that I need from you. Can you come through? Like, it's weird when you can't hear anyone else. I also had another song that can heal even better. That's like, that one never fails to make me feel better when I'm down. So if you guys want to hear another one, it's cool. I'm sure most of you know it there. When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need, when you feel so tired you can't sleep, stuck in reverse, when tears come streaming down your face, when you lose some things you can't replace, when you love someone but it goes to waste, could it be worse? Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. High up above and down below, when you're too in love to let it go. But if you never try, then you'll never know just what you're worth. Lights will guide you home and ignite your home. I will try to fix you. Thank you guys. This was a fun experience. You guys did great. I love to hear it. I love to watch it. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Yannick. That was amazing.
I had a great time.
All right. Thank you all for being with us on this lovely Monday. And thank you so much to our panelists, Dr. Jessica Ward-King, Ali Salama, Myriam Georges-Estigene, Nina Charley, Joanna Townsend, and Farahat, as well as the following people for putting the event together: Invest Ottawa, who provided us with this platform, and Rideau Rockcliffe Community Resource Center, who provided us with a cool space to record everything. As mentioned previously, we would also like to thank AJF, who made the project possible, and Rising Youth, funded by the Government of Canada, who made the expansion to the University of Ottawa possible. And thank you so much, Drayton, once again, for putting everything together. And we hope to see you either on our socials and at our next year's HealMind conference. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Bye.